This is literally everything you need to know about the Khajiit. Everything. We're talking about one of the most unique and complex races in gaming history. And honestly, they deserve way more attention than they get. Most people just think cat people who like to steal stuff, but there's so much more going on here that it'll make your head spin. Also, another shout out to Derico, aka Hopeless Noob, for sending in today's gameplay. If you also play any Elder Scrolls games and want your gameplay featured in a video, you can use the form in the description. Let's start with what makes these guys so different from every other fantasy race you've ever seen. The Khajiit aren't just one thing. They're not like the elves, where everyone is basically the same. No, the Khajiit have this absolutely wild biological quirk where what you look like depends entirely on when you were born. And I'm not talking about genetics here. Your parents could be two normal bipedal cat people, and you could come out looking like a house cat or a giant tiger. It all comes down to the moons. Nirn has 2 moons. Masser is the big one, and Secunda is the smaller one. The Khajiit call them Joan and Jode in their language. When a Khajiit is born, whatever phase those 2 moons are in at that exact moment determines what form they take. This system is called the lunar lattice or Jakaje in the Khajiiti language Tagra. There are 16 different combinations of moon phases that create 16 different main forms, plus one special 17th form that only happens under very specific circumstances. The phase of Masser determines the basic body structure. When Masser is full, you get the big quadrupedal forms, the ones that walk on 4 legs. When it's new, you get the smaller bipedal forms. The waxing and waning phases give you everything in between. Then Secunda determines how bestial or human-like the Khajiit looks. When Secunda is waxing, the Khajiit appears less beast-like and more humanoid. When it's waning, they look more feral and cat-like. Let me walk you through all of these forms because they're genuinely fascinating. Starting with the smallest, you have the Elfiq. These are Khajiit that look exactly like house cats. You wouldn't know they're intelligent unless they spoke to you. They're actually highly gifted with magic, which makes sense because they can't use weapons or tools with paws. A lot of people outside Elsewhere treat them like pets, which the Alfic find incredibly insulting. They rarely leave their homeland because of this treatment. Some sources say Alfic can't speak, but that's completely wrong. They can talk, they just often choose not to around outsiders who treat them poorly. The Alfikracht are slightly bigger than regular Alfic, and they're apparently sensitive about being mistaken for their smaller cousins. They're said to make great leaders despite their size. Then you have the Dagi and Dagiracht. These live in the trees of the Tenmar forest. They're small and light, perfect for dwelling in the upper branches. The Dagirat are bigger but still small enough to live in trees. They're both naturally skilled with magic. There's not a ton known about them because they keep to themselves in the southern jungles. Moving up in size, you get to the bipedal forms that most players are familiar with. The Ohms are the most human-looking Khajiit. They look almost like Bosmer wood elves. No tail, very little fur, basically human features. Because of this, they often serve as diplomats and adventurers outside of Elsewhere. To honor their heritage, Ohms typically paint their faces with feline markings. These were the Khajiit you saw in the very first Elder Scrolls game, Arena. The Omasrat look similar but have light fur and a tail. These showed up in Daggerfall. The Suthe are similar to the Omasrat but more cat-like. The Suthe-rat are what you saw in Morrowind and Elder Scrolls Online as the playable race. They walk upright, they're covered in fur, they have tails, and their faces are distinctly feline. One thing that sets them apart is they have digitigrade legs, meaning they walk on their toes like cats do, with that characteristic bent leg structure. They're described as good jumpers, agile, and sneaky with a bold spirit. This makes them good adventurers and traders. They're the most common form you'll find outside of Elsewhere. Some people mistakenly call them Ja Khajiit, but this is actually considered a slur by Khajiit themselves. The Cathay and Cathay Rat are what you see in Oblivion and Skyrim, though it's never explicitly stated in those games. The Cathay are about the size of humans and mer, maybe slightly taller. They are covered in fur with feline features, but unlike the Sutai rat, they have plantigrade legs, meaning they walk flat-footed like humans do. The Cathay rat are even bigger and stronger, often described as looking like upright jaguars. They're particularly fierce warriors. A character named Theris in the real Baron Zaya stories was a Cathay rat. The Toje and Toje rat live in the southern marshes and jungles like the Tenmar forest. Not much is known about them, but older stories call them the dancers in the dark. They're said to be able to read the will of the moons and use strange magics. Statues depicting them as dancers exist throughout elsewhere. The Toje rat are larger and renowned for their combat skills. Now we get to the really big ones. The Pahmar look like tigers. They walk on four legs, they're massive, and they're incredibly strong. The Pahmar rat are even bigger and more powerful. They usually have markings like tigers and seek out physical challenges. They often serve as bodyguards and warriors. These guys can weigh as much as 20 altmer, which is saying something. The Sench are even bigger. They're about as tall as an altmer when standing on all fours, or roughly the shoulder height of a horse. They weigh about as much as 20 altmer too. They have thick forelimbs and their rear limbs are about 1.5 times as long, giving them an ape-like appearance when you really look at them. Other Khajiit often ride them as mounts. The Senchrat are the biggest Khajiit that exist. They're twice as tall as a Sench and can weigh as much as 50 altmer. They're known as battle cats to Imperials, and they're absolutely devastating in combat. They also serve as mounts for other Khajiit, especially during warfare. The one thing that confuses people is that there are also creatures called Sencha tigers that aren't actually Khajiit. They're just large feline creatures related to Khajiit. When a moon bishop from Esso was asked about this, he explained that the Khajiit use the term Sencha very flexibly. They might call any large cat cousin a Sench tiger or Sench leopard or Sench panther, depending on how it looks, but the actual Sencha and Sencha rat first stocks are true Khajiit with full intelligence and sapience. Then there's the 17th form. When both moons align in a very rare phase called the dark moon, a Mane is born. The Mane is the spiritual and political leader of all Khajiit. Tradition says only one mane can exist at a time, and many believe the mane is actually one entity reincarnated into different bodies throughout history. This is similar to how the Dunmer view the Nerevarine. The Mane can't even move on their own because traditionally, every Khajiit would cut off a lock of their hair and braid it into the Mane's Mane. With millions of Khajiit in modern elsewhere, this tradition has become impractical, but the Mane still wears the braided hair of his tribe and warrior guard. Because of all this hair, the Mane has to be carried around on a palanquin by Cathay rat servants. Now here's where it gets wild. Your parents' forms don't matter at all. 2 Alfik could have a Sencharat child if the moons are right. 2 Cathay could have an Omus child. The moons determine everything. A family could have children that look like house cats, bipedal cat people, and massive tigers all living together, and this would be completely normal in Khajiiti culture. They don't see these different forms as different races or even really different. They're all just Khajiit. All Khajiit are born looking roughly similar as cubs, probably something like the Alfik form, and they grow into their destined form over time. This means when a Khajiit is pregnant, she doesn't know what her child will look like until the moons hit the right phase at birth. You can imagine how different this makes Khajiiti society compared to other races. So where do these cat people come from? Well, there are a few versions of this story. The Khajiit have their own creation myth that's pretty different from what humans and elves believe. Their story starts with 2 primordial beings, Anur and Fadomai. These are the Khajiiti versions of Anur and Padomai, the 2 fundamental forces of the Elder Scrolls universe. Anur and Fadomai were the original litter mates, and they gave birth to the Great Spirits. Their first litter included Alkosh, the first cat, who is basically their version of Akatosh, the Time Dragon. There was also Khenarti, who's like Kynareth, Magrus, who's Magnus, Mara, and Serendar, who's Stendar. This first litter represented order and stability. Then came a second litter, including Meruns, who's Myruns Dagon, Mafala, who's Mefala, and Sangin, who's Sanguin. This litter represented chaos and darker forces. Ahnur didn't want more children, but Fadomai was convinced by her elder children to birth one final litter. This third litter contained Azura, who's Azura, Nirni, who literally became the planet Nirn, and the two moons, Joan and Jode. When Ahnur saw this final litter, he became furious with Fadomai. She fled to the void and gave birth to one last child, Lorkaj, who's the Khajiit version of Lorcan. Fadomai was dying after giving birth to Lorkaj. Her life had been completely drained. But before she died, she gave Nirni a gift, the ability to birth children of her own. Nirni went to Lorkaj and asked him to form a dwelling place, a home for her children. Lorkaj convinced many of the spirits to create this dwelling, which became Mundus, the mortal plane. Here's where the story gets specific to the Khajiit. Nirni birthed many children, all the different races of humans and mare, but Azura had been given a special gift by Fadomai. She was allowed to take one group of Nirni's children and reshape them however she wanted, as long as she made them the fastest, cleverest, and most beautiful of all creatures. Azura chose a group of forest dwellers and transformed them into the Khajiit. Nirni was absolutely furious about this. She asked her sibling Yifer to punish the Khajiit. Yifer turned their grasslands into harsh desert and their forests into poisonous marshes, but Azura protected the Khajiit. She taught them the secret of the moons, the lunar lattice, and showed them how to change their forms to survive. She spoke 3 secrets to them. After speaking the first 2 secrets which created the Khajiit and bound them to the lunar lattice, she spoke the 3rd secret, and the light from the moons shone down on the marshes and became crystallized moonlight. This became moon sugar. Now, some imperial scholars think this is all nonsense. They believe the Khajiit evolved naturally from non-sapient cats, just like they think Argonians evolved from lizards. But what we know for certain is that Khajiit were already living in Tamriel when the Aldmer first arrived. Topal the pilot, who founded the Eyelid Empire, described an intelligent but primitive race of cat people living in the forests around Lake Rumare when his expedition arrived. So the Khajiit are one of the original inhabitants of Tamriel, possibly predating humans and elves entirely. The Khajiit homeland is elsewhere. The name itself comes from a Khajiiti proverb that says, "The perfect society is always elsewhere." Their word for paradise is Yesware. The province sits on the southern coast of Tamriel, bordering Cyrodiil to the north and Valenwood to the west. The climate divides pretty sharply between north and south. Northern elsewhere, the region called Anakina, is harsh badlands, desert, and dry plains. There's this massive desert called the Scar that runs through the center with a huge canyon system. Life is tough up there, and it produced a hardened warrior culture among the northern Khajiit. Southern elsewhere, called Palatine, couldn't be more different. Its lush jungles, rainforests, and fertile river basins. This region has ancient mercantile traditions, a stable agricultural aristocracy based on exporting saltrice and moon sugar, and a thriving artistic culture. The northern and southern Khajiit looked at each other with disdain for thousands of years. The northerners thought the southerners were soft and decadent, while the southerners thought the northerners were barbaric and crude. Before recorded history, Elsewhere had 16 kingdoms, one for each of the major Khajiiti clans. These kingdoms were remarkably cooperative compared to other races at the time. Each clan specialized in different things, and they worked together in a system of mutual benefit. Different first stocks would take on roles suited to their forms. The Alfiq and Dagi handled magic and scholarship. The Cathay and Sute did trade and diplomacy. The Senche and Pamar served as mounts and warriors. This cooperative specialization actually worked pretty well. Then everything changed in the year 1E 2260. The Thracian plague swept through Tamriel, and it hit elsewhere hard. This plague was deliberately unleashed by the Slode to clear out other races from their territories. It killed massive numbers of Khajiit and reduced the 16 kingdoms down to just two major powers, Anequina in the north and Palatine in the south. These two kingdoms spent the next era feuding with each other, often to the point of open warfare. In the year 2E 309, something remarkable happened. Kirgo, the leader of Anequina, married Eshita, the leader of Palatine. This marriage officially created the Elsewhere Confederacy, uniting the Khajiit under one banner for the first time in over 1,000 years. But just because the rulers united didn't mean everyone was happy about it. There were riots and raids between cities. The Northerners felt betrayed because they saw Palatine as weak and decadent. The Southerners felt betrayed because they saw Anequina as barbarous and uncivilized. The conflict got so bad that it threatened to tear apart the new confederacy before it even really started. That's when the Mane stepped in. A Mane named Ridthar Ridata, who's remembered as the first Mane, even though he wasn't technically the first ever, brought about what's called the Ridlthar Epiphany. This was a religious reformation that completely changed Khajiiti society. The Ridlthar established a new religious framework that all Khajiit were expected to follow. Before this, there were 16 different faiths, probably one for each of the original kingdoms and possibly one for each first stock. These different beliefs competed with each other for followers. The Ridlthar brought everyone together under one theological umbrella. It emphasized worship of the moons and established which spirits were acceptable to venerate and which weren't. The Ridlthar also set up a rotational power system based on the phases of Maser and Secunda. Both the northern tribes under their chieftains and the southern city dwellers under their nobility would share control of the region, alternating based on the moon phases. The Mane oversaw all of this as both spiritual leader and temporal ruler. Some Manes were better at this than others. Some led the Khajiit to periods of peace and prosperity. Others led them into conflict and war, especially with the Bosmer in Valenwood. The virtues taught by the Ridlthar are central to modern Khajiiti life. They must be curious to avoid the deceptions of Lorkhaj. They must be clever to navigate life's hardships. They must be kind to blaze a trail for the downtrodden to follow. They must be pious to avoid the temptations of Namira, the great darkness. And they must be wary of other races and the dangers of oblivion. These 5 virtues guide how Khajiit are supposed to live. Now we need to talk about moon sugar because it's absolutely central to Khajiiti culture. Moon sugar is a granular white powder that comes from sugarcane grasses that grow along the coasts and estuaries of southern Elsewhere, especially in the Tenmar forest region. When light hits it, the sugar seems to glow from within. The Khajiit believe it's literally crystallized moonlight, caught in the waters of the Topal Sea and carried to the sugarcane groves by the twin tides. To the Khajiit, moon sugar is sacred. It's a gift from their gods. By consuming moon sugar, they believe they're eating small portions of the eternal souls of Joan and Jode. It's used in religious ceremonies where moon bishops carefully control its use. The visions people experience during these ceremonies are seen as messages from the twin moons, though there's always a risk of attracting the attention of Sheogorath, the Daedric Prince of Madness. The Khajiit call him the skooma cat because what's crazier than a cat on skooma? Moon sugar is everywhere in Khajiiti cooking. Their cuisine is invariably sweet. They use moon sugar as a spice. They bake it into cakes and candies. They mix it into puddings and what they call sugar meats. The Khajiit have a massive sweet tooth that comes from incorporating moon sugar into their daily diet. Other races are cautioned against eating Khajiiti food because humans and Mer are much more susceptible to moon sugar's effects than Khajiit are. What's a normal amount for a Khajiit could send a human into fits of euphoria. The problem is that moon sugar is also a powerful narcotic. It has analgesic and soporific effects. In humans and Mer, even small amounts cause a brief euphoric state followed by intense lethargy and disorientation. With sustained use, it can cause permanent mental deterioration and confusion. Because of this, the Empire banned moon sugar throughout its territory. Most merchants won't do business with anyone carrying it, but in Elsewhere, and later under the Aldmeri Dominion, moon sugar was perfectly legal because most of its uses are benign for Khajiit. The streets of Elsewhere's major cities do have Khajiit who've overindulged and are lying around in the grip of sugar fits. It's a problem, but it's not as universal as some outside accounts make it sound. Most Khajiit respect moon sugar as a sacred substance and use it responsibly. The real problem comes from skooma. Skooma is moon sugar refined with other substances, primarily nightshade. The exact recipe is a closely guarded secret, but the result is a liquid drug that's far more potent than raw moon sugar. Some sources claim skooma was originally developed by the Dunmer, while others say it's a Khajiiti creation that got out of hand. Regardless of its origin, skooma is devastatingly addictive. When someone uses skooma, they experience intense euphoria, but this is followed by deep lethargy and confusion. The cycle repeats, and users become trapped in alternating states of delusional happiness and barely functional exhaustion. Long-term skooma use causes permanent mental damage, loss of teeth, and severe physical deterioration. Traditional wisdom holds that skooma addiction is incurable, though there are scattered reports of people breaking free through either alchemy or by addressing the self-hatred that often drives addiction. Skooma production happens in hidden dens and secret operations. The liquids used to refine skooma from moon sugar are highly flammable, making production dangerous. Skooma can be smoked through elaborate water pipes or consumed as a liquid. There are different varieties with different potencies. Balmora Blue was a particularly powerful variety made in the Dunmer city of Balmora before it was destroyed. After the city fell, existing supplies became exponentially more valuable. Redwater skooma is another especially potent form that was being produced in Skyrim during the 4th era, refined using water from a vampiric blood spring. The skooma trade has given the Khajiit a terrible reputation. Many Khajiit do traffic in skooma, not because they're all addicts, but because it's incredibly profitable and they're often shut out of legitimate commerce. The caravans that wander Skyrim in the 4th era carry skooma because there's demand for it, and they need the money to survive since they're not allowed into the cities. This perpetuates a vicious cycle. People assume Khajiit are skooma dealers and thieves, so they exclude them from society, which forces some Khajiit into exactly those roles to survive, which reinforces the stereotype. But here's what a lot of people miss. Many Khajiit see skooma as a perversion of Azura's gift. Taking the sacred crystallized moonlight and mixing it with poison to create an addictive drug is, to religious Khajiit, a spiritual abomination. Some Khajiit do use and sell skooma, sure, but painting the entire race with that brush is like saying all humans are criminals because some humans commit crimes. The Khajiit's relationship with the Empire has been complicated throughout history. When Tiber Septim conquered Elsewhere and incorporated it into his empire, many Khajiit soldiers joined the imperial legions. They served with distinction as scouts and skirmishers thanks to their natural speed and agility. Khajiit legions fought in wars far from their homeland and earned respect for their discipline and ferocity. But this service also made Elsewhere dependent on the empire, tying their prosperity to Cyrodiil's fortunes. When the empire weakened in the 4th era, Khajiit loyalty began to waver. Then came the Void Knights, and everything changed. In the year 4E98, both moons vanished from the sky. They were just gone. For 2 years, Maser and Secunda didn't appear in the night sky anywhere on Nirn. For most of Tamriel, this was deeply unsettling and frightening. For Elsewhere, it was catastrophic. The moons aren't just important to Khajiiti culture. They're intrinsic to Khajiiti biology and religion. The phases determine which first stocks are born. The lunar lattice is believed to protect Mundus from the rest of the Orbis. The moons are the bodies of stillborn gods that still provide blessings through moonlight and moon sugar. When they disappeared, it threw elsewhere into complete chaos. There was massive panic and unrest. What was happening to Khajiit born during this time? Were any being born at all? What did this mean for the lunar lattice? Were the gods abandoning them? We don't know exactly what happened during those 2 years. The historical record is frustratingly vague, but we know it was bad. Really bad. The social fabric of elsewhere was tearing apart. Then, in 4E100, the moons suddenly returned, and the Thalmor took credit for it. The Thalmor are the ruling faction of the Third Aldmeri Dominion, an elven supremacist government controlled by the Altmer. They claimed they had used previously undiscovered dawn magics to restore the moons. Whether this is true or not remains one of the biggest mysteries in Elder Scrolls lore. The Thalmor might have actually caused the Void Knights and then ended them. They might have just known, through some form of divination, that the moons would return naturally and timed their announcement perfectly. Or maybe they really did restore the moons using magic nobody else understands. We don't know. What we do know is that the Khajiit believed them completely. The Thalmor were hailed as saviors. They had brought back the moons, they had saved Khajiiti existence itself. Within 15 years, imperial influence in elsewhere had eroded so much that the empire couldn't do anything when a coup in 4E115 overthrew the elsewhere confederacy. The two old kingdoms of Anekina and Palatine were re-established as client states of the Third Aldmeri Dominion. When the Great War broke out between the Aldmeri Dominion and the Empire, Khajiiti soldiers fought for the Dominion, not as conquered subjects, but as grateful allies. A Thalmor general named Lord Narifin led a massive force that attacked Cyrodiil from the south, marching out of hidden camps in northern elsewhere. This flanking maneuver caught the imperial defenses completely off guard and was a major factor in the Dominion's early victories. By the time of Skyrim, set in 4E201, elsewhere is firmly under Dominion control. The Thalmor have positioned themselves as the guardians of the moons and by extension, the guardians of the Khajiit themselves. Thalmor envoys enforce loyalty, temples teach reverence for the Dominion, and propaganda constantly reminds everyone that the Thalmor brought back the moons. Many Khajiit accept this rule gratefully. Others resent it but keep quiet. Some small rebellions have flared in the desert regions of Anequina, but they're quickly crushed. The current state of elsewhere is one of uneasy unity under foreign oversight. The Khajiit are nominally independent with their two kingdoms, but everyone knows the Thalmor pull the strings. Khajiiti warriors march under Thalmor banners. The moon sugar trade is controlled by elven overseers. The Dominion uses elsewhere's resources and soldiers for their own purposes. Yet the Khajiit endure because endurance is what they do. Caravans still cross borders despite restrictions. Smugglers still move goods into Skyrim and Cyrodiil. Merchants still thrive. The Khajiit adapt and wait, perhaps for the day when the moons might guide them to freedom. Throughout their history, the Khajiit have faced terrible discrimination and persecution. They've been enslaved by the Dunmer for thousands of years. Even after the Empire was established, the armistice that brought Morrowind into the Empire specifically protected the Dunmer right to own slaves as a concession to their culture. Khajiit and Argonians were the primary victims of this arrangement. Dunmer raiding parties would venture into elsewhere and Black Marsh specifically to capture slaves. The slavery practiced by great houses Drez and Telvanni was brutal. Slaves were worked to death on Sultrice plantations. They were beaten and killed for minor infractions. They were treated as property, as tools, less than people. The Twin Lamps, an abolitionist organization, tried to help escaped slaves, but the institution was protected by law. It wasn't until King Helseth Hlalu outlawed slavery in Morrowind during the late Third Era that this practice officially ended, though it's unclear how thoroughly the ban was enforced. Even outside of outright slavery, the Khajiit face constant prejudice. In Skyrim, they're banned from entering cities. The Khajiit caravans have to camp outside the walls. The official reason given is concerns about theft and skooma dealing, but it's pretty clearly just racism. Ahkari, one of the caravan leaders, notes that it's the Nords who are distrustful and that many of them assume the worst about Khajiit. Inside cities, when Khajiit do live there, they're often relegated to the worst neighborhoods. In Riften, the Khajiit who do manage to get in work for Maven Blackbriar, because she'll use anyone regardless of race if they're useful. In other holds, you see very few Khajiit residents at all. The few who achieve prominence, like Jizargo at the College of Winterhold, are exceptional both in their skills and in their ability to overcome the prejudice directed at them. Part of this discrimination comes from the Khajiit's appearance. They're beast folk, fundamentally different from humans and elves. People who look down on the Khajiit call them animals. The term beast race itself carries a derogatory connotation even though it's widely used. In Morrowind, Khajiit couldn't wear boots or closed helmets because of their digitigrade legs and facial structure. This practical limitation became another way to mark them as different, as lesser. The Khajiit are often characterized as thieves and criminals. There's some truth to this stereotype in that many Khajiit do turn to thievery and assassination, but this is a matter of circumstance, not inherent nature. When you're excluded from cities, when you can't find legitimate work, when everyone assumes you're a criminal anyway, the actual criminal organizations start to look pretty appealing. The Thieves Guild doesn't discriminate. The Dark Brotherhood doesn't care what you look like as long as you can kill. These organizations become refuges for Khajiit who have nowhere else to go. The Khajiit's natural abilities do make them excellent thieves. They can see in the dark with their night eye ability. They're naturally stealthy and agile. They have retractable claws that make them dangerous even when unarmed. But these same abilities also make them excellent scouts, warriors, and adventurers. The problem is that society only seems to notice when Khajiit use these skills for crime. In combat, many Khajiit disdain weapons entirely and rely on their claws. They've developed an entire martial arts tradition called claw dances, though outsiders call them the Rain of Sand fighting styles. These aren't just forms of combat, they're a form of meditation. The claw dances channel the nervous energy that emanates from the monks who practice them and find expression in raw physicality. The predatory instinct of the Khajiit and the natural range of motion of their claws create a fighting style completely unique to their race. There are many different disciplines of claw dances that are taught at places like the Temple of Two Moons dance. Each style has its own philosophy and techniques. Goutfang, Whispering Fang, and Rowlith Kaj are among the named styles. Masters of these arts can be absolutely devastating opponents, using wide leaps and precise claw strikes to overwhelm enemies. When a Khajiit master fights, it's like watching a dance. A violent, bloody dance, but a dance nonetheless. Khajiit fashion and personal decoration is another fascinating aspect of their culture. They love bright textiles and shiny objects. They wear cloth shawls called budi in brilliant colors to protect themselves from the sun in the desert regions. They adorn themselves with sparkling jewelry and trinkets. They braid their fur with flowers and herbs. The bipedal fur stalks who grow enough hair will style it elaborately. The Ohms, who have very little fur, tattoo their faces with feline markings to resemble their more obviously feline cousins. Piercings are extremely common among Khajiit. After Morrowind, they became the only race other than Argonians who are consistently shown with piercings in the games. Earrings, facial piercings, decorative beads woven into fur or hair, all of these are standard for Khajiit who want to express themselves. In a society where your physical form is decided by forces completely outside your control, personal decoration becomes an important way to assert your individual identity. The Khajiit language is Ta'agra. It has its own unique structure and vocabulary that's completely different from Tamrielic. Khajiit names follow specific patterns that convey information about the speaker. Prefixes like J, M, S, Dar, Dro, and Ra indicate different things. The prefix reflects status, accomplishments, or sometimes just personal preference. Male Khajiit often have prefixes that display their status in life, though using two honorifics is seen as either showing great pride or great ignorance. Female Khajiit names often use apostrophes but follow slightly different patterns. Names like Akari, Kaila, and Savani don't have the same prefix system as male names. The exact rules for female naming aren't as well documented as male naming, but there's definitely structure there. Khajiit also famously refer to themselves in the third person. Jizargo says Jizargo did this. Harjo says Harjo will go there. Not all Khajiit do this, and it seems to be more common among those who aren't completely fluent in Tamrielic. It might be a quirk of translating Tagra grammar into Common, or it might be a cultural affectation that some Khajiit maintain even when they could speak in first person if they wanted to. The spiritual life of the Khajiit is enormously complex. The Khajiiti pantheon includes dozens of spirits, both Adric and Daedric, though the Khajiit don't really separate them into those categories the way humans and Mer do. To the Khajiit, they're all spirits, and which ones you venerate depends on your needs and situation. Alkosh, the first cat, is the draconic time deity. He's their version of Akatosh, the chief deity of the nine divines, but for the Khajiit, Alkosh is specifically a cat, the very first cat, the one from whom all Khajiit trace their lineage. He's associated with time, order, and the lunar lattice. Azura is the mother of all Khajiit. She's the spirit who shaped them from the original forest dwellers into the fastest, cleverest, and most beautiful race. She taught them the secrets of the lunar lattice. She created moon sugar. She's one of the most important deities in Khajiiti religion. To outsiders, she's known as Azura, one of the Daedric princes. The Khajiit don't see her as evil or even particularly Daedric. She's their creator and protector. Kenarthi is the winds, the spirit of weather and the sky. She's their version of Kynareth. She's the one who rocked the stillborn moons in the sky after they were born and made their eyes bright with divine lanterns, so Fatumai wouldn't realize they had died until she herself passed. Kenarthi relights these lanterns when they burn low. Lorkaj is the moon beast, the trickster. He's Lorcan, the missing god, the one who convinced the other spirits to create Mundus. Before the Riddletar, Lorkaj was venerated as the one who showed the Khajiit a path to walk. After the Riddletar epiphany, he became more of a cautionary figure. The Riddletar teaches that Lorkaj's deceptions must be avoided. His body was hurled to the moons after death, and he's forced to follow Joan and Jode forever as punishment. There's also the hidden moon, sometimes called the dark moon or the third moon. This is associated with Lorkaj in his purified form. After being corrupted by Namira, the Great Darkness, Lorkaj was eventually redeemed by Azura. He became the protector of the lunar lattice, prowling it to protect souls from the void. The hidden moon represents the true spirit of Lorkaj, freed from darkness. It's invoked by acolytes of the Order of the Hidden Moon. The clan mothers are the primary religious authorities in Khajiiti communities. They maintain autonomy from the Mane and tribal leaders. Their duty is to teach and disseminate the cultural myths and religious knowledge to their clans. The clan mothers are almost always female, and they hold enormous respect within Khajiiti society. A book called Words of Clan Mother Ahnisi to her favorite daughter is one of the primary sources for understanding Khajiiti creation mythology. The afterlife for good Khajiit is called the Sands Behind the Stars. It's a celestial desert realm where worthy souls go after death. The path there follows the lunar lattice, traveling along lunar pathways to reach Azura's crossing. Acolytes of the Order of the Hidden Moon help guide souls along these paths. Now, let's talk about how the Khajiit have appeared throughout the Elder Scrolls games, because it's actually a pretty interesting evolution. In the first game, Arena, the Khajiit were the Oma's first stock. They looked basically human, with maybe some slight facial markings. This was probably due to technical limitations of the time. The game came out in 1994, and having unique models for a beast race would have been a huge undertaking. In Daggerfall, which came out in 1996, the Khajiit were Omezrat. They had light fur, a tail, and more feline features, but they still looked more humanoid than bestial. Again, this was probably partly a technical decision. The sprites used in Daggerfall could only do so much. Everything changed with Morrowind in 2002. This was when the Khajiit became the fully feline bipedal creatures that most players recognize. The Sutairat fur stock appeared in Morrowind, and they were completely covered in fur, had distinctly cat-like faces, and walked on digitigrade legs. This is also when the restriction on footwear and closed helmets appeared. The unique leg and head structure meant the standard armor models wouldn't work. Players complained about this limitation, but it actually added to the feeling that Khajiit were genuinely different. In Oblivion, the Khajiit were probably Cathay, though the game never explicitly states which fur stock they are. They lost the digitigrade legs and now had plantigrade legs like humans. They could wear any boots and helmets. Their faces were more lion-like, with a softer, rounder appearance. The change in leg structure might have been for gameplay reasons to make animation easier, or it might have been an intentional choice to show a different fur stock. In Skyrim, the Khajiit are also most likely Cathay or possibly Sutairat again, though there's debate about this. Their appearance changed significantly. Their faces became more angular and lynx-like, with pointed ears and thick cheek fur. They look noticeably different from Oblivion's Khajiit, more like northern cats adapted to cold climates. Some fans joke that something strange happens to Khajiit when they arrive in Skyrim, as Mike the Liar himself notes in the game. Elder Scrolls Online shows the most diversity in Khajiit fur stocks. The playable race is Suthairat, but throughout the game you encounter Alfik, Kathairat, Pamar, Dagi, Dagirat, Sencherat, and even Damane. This is the first time players really got to see the full range of Khajiiti forms in a game. The Elsewhere chapter that came out in 2019 was especially important for showing Khajiit culture and diversity. The in-universe explanation for why different games show different fur stocks is simple. Different regions at different times have different populations. In Vardenfell during Morrowind, the Sutairat were the most common. In Cyrodiil during Oblivion, the Cathay were prevalent. In Skyrim during Skyrim, it's unclear which fur stock is most common, but they all seem to be the same one. It's like how in real life, if you go to different parts of a country, you'll see different demographics. Except in this case, the demographics can range from house cat to tiger. One thing that's interesting is that there are no documented cases of crossbreeding between Khajiit and other races. This might be biological incompatibility, or it might just be that such relationships are rare enough that they're not recorded. Given how much other races look down on Khajiit, it's not surprising that interracial relationships would be uncommon. The Khajiit themselves might also prefer to stick to their own kind, especially given their unique biology and culture. Khajiit have a lifespan similar to humans. They're not particularly long-lived like elves, nor short-lived like goblins. A Khajiit who avoids violence, disease, and addiction can expect to live maybe 70 to 90 years, much like a human or Redguard. This makes their history feel more immediate. Events from 100 years ago were experienced by people's grandparents, not distant ancestors. Let's talk about some notable Khajiit characters, because they help illustrate the diversity and depth of this race. The most famous is probably Mike the Liar. He appears in Morrowind, Oblivion, Skyrim, and ESO. Mike is a meta character who breaks the fourth wall to comment on game design, cut features, and community complaints. In Morrowind, he tells you about features that don't exist, like how you can find dragons if you fly high enough. In Oblivion, he runs incredibly fast and makes comments responding to forum discussions and development issues. In Skyrim, he remarks on features that changed from previous games. Whether Mike is one immortal being or a lineage of Khajiit all named Mike is deliberately ambiguous. In Skyrim, he says his father was also called Mike, as was his father's father, at least that's what his father said. But he's appeared across more than 1,000 years of in-game history, which is way too long for a Khajiit lifespan. Some fans theorize he has achieved Kim, a state of metaphysical enlightenment that allows one to manipulate reality. Michael Kirkbride, a lead writer for the series, once described Mike as a kind of cosmic radio tower, a fulcrum around which the universe rotates to anchor reality. Whether that's canon or just Kirkbride being Kirkbride is unclear. J'zargo is a student at the College of Winterhold in Skyrim. He's studying to become a great mage, possibly the greatest mage ever, and he's not shy about his ambitions. J'zargo is one of two Khajiit who can become a follower in Skyrim. He's interesting because he's managed to gain admission to the college and earn respect from his peers despite the prejudice against Khajiit. His quest involves testing his experimental flame cloak scrolls, which unfortunately have some bugs. Karjo is the other potential Khajiit follower in Skyrim. He's a caravan guard who works for Akari, traveling between Dawnstar and Riften. He's loyal, steadfast, and surprisingly warm once you earn his trust. His personal quest involves recovering a moon amulet that belonged to his mother, something that's clearly precious to him. Karjo represents the many Khajiit who live on Skyrim's roads, making the best of a difficult situation. Rhysad, Akari, and Madran are the three caravan leaders who travel around Skyrim. Rhysad in particular is notable for his philosophical patience. He accepts that Khajiit aren't trusted, that they're forced to camp outside cities, that life is harder for them. He doesn't fight it with anger, he just keeps moving and trading, surviving day by day. There's a quiet dignity to how these caravan Khajiit handle their situation. In Iso, there's Razumdar, a spy and agent who works for Queen Iron of the Aldmeri Dominion. He's charismatic, clever, and often uses humor to diffuse tense situations. He's involved in numerous questlines throughout Iso and has become a fan favorite. Razumdar shows that Khajiit can excel in espionage and diplomacy when given the opportunity. Kunza-Ri is a legendary ancient hero from Khajiiti history. He appears prominently in Iso's Elsewhere chapter. According to legend, he was sculpted out of moonlight, clouds, and the courage of a young Khajiit girl who called to the moons for help. He became a great hero and protector. His legacy is remembered throughout Elsewhere, and artifacts associated with him hold great power. There are theories and mysteries surrounding the Khajiit that are worth exploring. The biggest mystery is what actually happened during the Void Nights. Did the Thalmor really restore the moons? If they did, how? If they didn't, did they cause the Void Nights in the first place, or did they just take advantage of a natural phenomenon? The fact that the Khajiit completely bought the Thalmor story suggests the Thalmor had some kind of foreknowledge at minimum. You don't just guess when the moons are going to come back and get lucky. There had to be something more going on. Some theorists believe the Thalmor used a ritual similar to what they attempted with the Numidium, or what the Marukati Selective did when they tried to remove the elven aspects from Akatosh. Maybe they briefly removed the moons from reality entirely, using some kind of dragon break or similar reality warping magic. Then they restored them and took credit. This would explain how they could predict exactly when the moons would return. Others think the disappearance was a natural astronomical event, perhaps the moons entering some kind of eclipse or dimensional phase. The Thalmor could have divined this using their considerable magical abilities and simply timed their announcement perfectly. They didn't do anything except have good timing. This is less dramatic, but perhaps more plausible. The darkest theory is that the Thalmor hid the moons using an elaborate illusion, not moving them, not destroying them, just hiding them from view. For 2 years, they maintained a massive enchantment over all of Nirn that prevented anyone from seeing Maser and Secunda. Then they ended the enchantment and claimed credit for bringing the moons back. This would have required enormous magical power and coordination, but the Thalmor have demonstrated both. It would also be particularly cruel because it means the Khajiit's suffering was completely manufactured. Another theory concerns the true origin of the Khajiit. Did Azura really transform a group of ancient elves or humans into the Khajiit, Or did they evolve naturally from prehistoric cats? The Khajiit creation myth says they were transformed, and there's some evidence for this. The fact that all Khajiit, regardless of first stock, are interfertile suggests they share a common origin despite vastly different appearances. Natural evolution usually doesn't work that way. On the other hand, imperial scholars insist the Khajiit evolved from cats, just like Argonians evolved from lizards. They point to the existence of sentient tigers and other non-sapient feline creatures as evidence of a gradual evolutionary process. Maybe the Khajiit just gained intelligence over time without any divine intervention. A compromise theory says maybe both are true. Maybe there were intelligent cat creatures already living on Tamriel, and Azura refined them, gave them the lunar lattice, and created the first stock system. She didn't create them from nothing, she took what existed and made it better. This would reconcile the creation myth with the evolutionary evidence. There's also the question of what the lunar lattice actually is. The Khajiit believe it protects Mundus from the rest of the Arbis. They think the motion of the moons creates this protective web. But nobody really knows how it works, or what would happen if it failed. Is it a metaphysical construct? Is it actual magic? Is it just a religious belief with no physical reality? The fact that Khajiit biology is genuinely tied to the moons suggests there's something real going on, but the exact mechanism is unclear. Some scholars wonder if the Mane might be more than just a leader. If the Mane really is one entity reincarnating through different bodies, what is that entity? Is it Lorkaj himself? Is it some aspect of Alkosh? Is it the collective unconscious of Al-Khajiit? The powers of the Mane are never really detailed in the games, but the way Khajiit treat the Mane with such reverence suggests there's something genuinely special about them beyond just political authority. There's speculation about first stocks that haven't been shown in the games. The sources say there are 16 main first stocks plus the Mane, but some texts hint at there being more than 20 forms. What are the missing ones? Are there massive Khajiit even bigger than Sencherat? Are there tiny ones even smaller than Alfiq? The existence of these theoretical forms is tantalizing. Some people wonder if a Khajiit could intentionally change their first stock. If the lunar lattice determines form based on moon phases, could powerful magic manipulate the lattice to change someone's form after birth? There's no evidence this has ever been done, but in a world with magic that can transform people into vampires and werewolves, it doesn't seem impossible. The Khajiit would probably consider it sacrilege, messing with Azura's design, but that doesn't mean it couldn't be attempted. There's also the question of what happened to Khajiit born during the Void Nights. Were any born at all? If they were, what form did they take with no moons to determine their first stock? The games never addressed this directly. Some fans theorize that no Khajiit were born during those 2 years, that pregnancy simply didn't result in viable births without the moons. Others think babies born during the Void Nights might have taken some random form, or possibly all the same default form. The Khajiit themselves probably find this too painful to discuss, which is why there are no accounts of it. The relationship between the Khajiit and Bosmer is another interesting area. Both races claim to have been shaped by Azura from original forest dwellers. The Bosmer say they were transformed by Yifre, but Yifre and Yifre seem to be the same spirit or at least closely related. The two races live right next to each other and have fought numerous wars throughout history. Are they actually related? Do they share a common ancestor before their respective divine interventions? The games hint at this but never confirm it. There's speculation that the Khajiit might have access to a form of magic unique to them tied to the lunar lattice. The Dagi and Dagirat are said to be naturally skilled with magic. The Toje are described as wielding strange magics and being able to read the will of the moons. But we never see what this actually looks like. Is there a whole school of lunar magic that hasn't been explored in the games? Could the Khajiit teach others this magic, or is it tied to their biological connection to the moons? Some fans have noticed that certain powerful Khajiit seem to have supernatural levels of skill. Mike the Liar can run faster than horses and may be immortal. Rare encounter reports have him near the corpses of dragons. Is this just game mechanics being funny, or is Mike actually that powerful? If the Khajiit can achieve such abilities, what's their upper limit? The nature of Khajiiti souls is another mystery. Are they different from human or mer souls? Dremora refer to mortals as slaves or cattle, but they seem to view Khajiit and Argonians somewhat differently than they view humans and elves. Is this just racial prejudice on the part of Daedra, or is there something genuinely different about beast race souls? There's a theory that the Khajiit might be more resistant to certain forms of reality warping magic precisely because of their connection to the lunar lattice. If the lattice protects Mundus from outside influences, maybe the Khajiit, who are bound to it, gain some of that protection. This could explain why the Khajiit have survived as long as they have, despite being targets of slavery and persecution. They're more resilient than they appear. Some wonder if the Talmor's control over elsewhere will last. The historical record shows the Khajiit cooperating with various powers over the centuries, but they've never been truly conquered. Even under the Empire, they maintained considerable autonomy. The Thalmor might think they have the Khajiit locked down because of the Void Knights, but gratitude eventually fades. If the Thalmor show themselves to be unreliable, or if another crisis reveals their limitations, the Khajiit might start questioning whether their saviors are really worth following. There's also the question of how the different first stocks interact in Khajiiti society. Do the Alfiq resent being treated like pets? Do the Sencherat feel used when other Khajiit ride them? The games suggest that all first stocks are treated as equals within Khajiiti culture, that a house cat Alfiq has the same rights and respect as a massive Cathay rat warrior. But that's the ideal. In practice, does discrimination happen? Are certain first stocks pushed towards certain roles? The claw dances and Khajiiti martial arts are another area that deserves more exploration. We know they exist and that they're a form of meditation as much as combat, but we've never really seen them in action. What would a master of Ralit Kaj or Gutfang actually do in battle? How different are these styles from each other? Could non-Khajiit learn them, or are they dependent on having claws and feline agility? Looking at everything we know about the Khajiit, they represent something really special in fantasy. They're not just humans with cat heads. They're a genuinely alien culture with biology that doesn't work like anything else in Tamriel. The fact that your appearance is determined by something completely outside your control, by the random phases of distant moons, creates a society that has to be fundamentally accepting of diversity. A Khajiit family embraces all their children regardless of whether they're tiny Alfiq or massive Sencherat, because those children are still Khajiit. This enforced diversity might be why Khajiit culture emphasizes cooperation and role specialization. Everyone has something they're good at. Everyone contributes in their own way. The fierce warrior Bahmaracht, the scholarly Alfiq, the diplomatic Omes, the nimble Sutairach trader, they all work together because they have to. No single first stock could maintain a civilization alone. The Khajiit's relationship with moon sugar and their gods is also unique. They literally consume what they believe are pieces of divine souls. This creates a direct, physical connection to their religion that other races don't have. When a Khajiit eats moon sugar, they're not just performing a ritual or prayer, they're ingesting their gods. This makes their faith tangible in a way that worship of the divines or even Daedric worship can't match. The tragedy of the Khajiit is that despite all their unique qualities, despite their rich culture and fascinating biology, they're treated like second-class citizens throughout Tamriel. They're stereotyped, excluded, enslaved, and discriminated against constantly. Yet they persist, they adapt, they survive. The Khajiit as a people embody resilience. There's something deeply compelling about playing as a Khajiit in the games. You're choosing to be an outsider, someone who faces prejudice and hostility just for existing. When a dragonborn Khajiit saves Skyrim from Alduin, do the Nords finally accept them? Not really. The guards still make snide comments about making rugs. The cities are still closed to Khajiit caravans. One exceptional Khajiit doesn't change centuries of prejudice, but you can prove through your actions that the stereotypes are wrong. The Elder Scrolls has always been good at showing the complexity of its world. The Khajiit are a perfect example of this. They're not just comic relief or exotic flavor. They're a fully realized culture with their own history, beliefs, struggles, and triumphs. Every Elder Scrolls game that includes them adds more depth and nuance to their story. From the Ohms of Arena, who looked almost human, to the Sutairat of Morrowind standing on their digitigrade legs, to the diverse array of Furstocks in ESO, the Khajiit have evolved as the series has grown. Each game teaches us something new about them. Each book you find adds another piece to the puzzle. Each Khajiit NPC you meet shows another facet of their culture. The Khajiit are survivors, traders, warriors, thieves, mages, and scholars. They're devoted to their gods and their moons. They cherish moon sugar as a sacred gift while struggling with the scourge of skooma. They're exploited by the Thalmor while trying to maintain their dignity and independence. They're complex, contradictory, fascinating people who deserve to be understood on their own terms rather than through the lens of prejudice and stereotype. Whether you're playing a sneaky Khajiit thief in Oblivion, a warrior Khajiit battling dragons in Skyrim, or exploring the diverse cultures of elsewhere in ESO, the Khajiit offer a perspective on Tamriel that no other race can provide. They're the outsiders who've always been there, the beast folk who've witnessed empires rise and fall, the children of the moons who've survived everything Tamriel has thrown at them. The Khajiit's gameplay mechanics across the different Elder Scrolls games tell their own story about how the race has been perceived and designed. In Morrowind, Khajiit started with bonuses to skills like acrobatics, athletics, hand-to-hand, light armor, security, short blade, and sneak. These skill bonuses reinforced the thief archetype, but they also made Khajiit incredibly mobile and versatile. With that acrobatics bonus, a Khajiit could jump over obstacles that would stop other races. The athletics bonus meant they could run faster and for longer. The game was practically begging you to play a Khajiit as a nimble, mobile character who avoided direct confrontation. The Eye of Night power in Morrowind gave Khajiit night vision for 30 seconds, which was incredibly useful in the many dark dungeons and tombs of Vardenfell. The Eye of Fear power could demoralize humanoid enemies, making them flee in terror. These powers reflected a cat's natural advantages, the ability to see in darkness, and the intimidating presence of a predator. In Oblivion, the skill bonuses shifted slightly. Khajiit got bonuses to acrobatics, athletics, blade, hand-to-hand, light armor, security, and sneak. The changes were subtle but significant. Blade replaced short blade, reflecting the game's simplified skill system. The skills still push players toward a thief or light warrior playstyle, but with enough versatility to go in different directions. Skyrim changed things up again. The skill bonuses went to alchemy, archery, lockpicking, one-handed, pickpocket, sneak, and speech. This spread the Khajiit's strengths across more diverse areas. The addition of speech suggested Khajiit could be effective traders and negotiators, not just thieves. Alchemy showed their connection to moon sugar and potions. The Night Eye power became a constant ability that could be toggled on and off at will, which was much more useful than the limited duration versions in previous games. The real standout feature in Skyrim was the Khajiit's claw damage. Their unarmed strikes dealt 22 points of damage, way more than any other race. This made unarmed combat actually viable for Khajiit, especially combined with the Fists of Steel perk that added gauntlet armor rating to unarmed damage, and the Gloves of the Pugilist, which could be disenchanted for more unarmed bonuses. A dedicated, unarmed Khajiit build could punch dragons to death, which was both ridiculous and awesome. In ESO, Khajiit have bonuses to health, stamina, and stamina recovery, plus increased critical damage and stealth radius reduction. These bonuses make them excellent for stamina-based DPS builds, which fits their lore as agile warriors and rogues. The racial passives encourage a hit-and-run playstyle, striking hard from stealth and using mobility to avoid damage. The way different games handle Khajiit equipment has evolved too. In Morrowind, the restriction on boots and closed helmets was frustrating, but lore accurate. It made playing a Khajiit feel genuinely different. You had to find open-faced helmets, and you just couldn't wear boots at all. This limited your armor options, but it emphasized that Khajiit weren't just humans with fur. When Oblivion removed this restriction, some fans were disappointed that the uniqueness was lost, but others appreciated not being mechanically penalized for their race choice. Skyrim continued allowing all equipment types, making Khajiit fully compatible with all playstyles from a mechanics perspective. Let's talk about specific Khajiit NPCs and questlines that show different aspects of their culture. In Morrowind, most of the Khajiit you meet are either slaves, ex-slaves, or caravanners. There's a whole questline with the Twin Lamps abolitionist movement where you can free slaves and help them escape. The fact that so many Khajiit in Morrowind are enslaved drives home how terrible their treatment has been historically. One memorable Khajiit in Morrowind is Mike, who lives on a small island in the Sheogorath region. He tells you all sorts of things about features that don't exist in the game. He claims you can become a lich by combining dragon's tongue with a lich heart cooked in the flesh of a well-ridden horse. There are no dragons in Morrowind, no horses, and while you can kill liches in the Tribunal expansion, you can't harvest their hearts. Every answer Mike gives is either a lie or impossible to verify. In Oblivion, the Khajiit population is much more integrated into society. Skriva is a fence for the Thieves Guild in Bravil, and she's one of the better-written Khajiit NPCs in the game. She's professional, no nonsense, and treats you with respect once you've proven yourself. The fact that she's risen to a position of authority in the Thieves Guild shows that Khajiit can succeed when given opportunities. Mike appears again in Oblivion, this time as a wandering NPC who runs around at incredible speed. He wears tattered robes and makes meta commentary about game features. He talks about how he's sad he can't give the player a fishy stick, which is a reference to an inside joke on the Elder Scrolls forums. He mentions that he saw mud crabs by the water, which is poking fun at Oblivion's repetitive NPC dialogue. Catching Mike requires patience or using calipers to trap him, which itself became a meme in the community. In Skyrim, the Khajiit caravans are some of the most memorable NPCs. Rizad's caravan travels between Whiterun and Markarth. He sells a variety of goods, including moon sugar and skooma if you're interested. His dialogue reflects a weary acceptance of how Khajiit are treated. When asked why Khajiit aren't allowed in cities, he explains that some Khajiit have been caught stealing, so now all Khajiit are banned. He doesn't seem angry about it, just resigned. Ahri's caravan goes between Dawnstar and Riften. She's more spirited than Rizad, and she'll tell you directly that it's the Nords who don't trust Khajiit. She keeps moving and trading despite the discrimination, because what else can she do? Her guard Kardjo can become a follower if you complete his quest to retrieve his moon amulet from bandits. The amulet belonged to his mother, and recovering it clearly means the world to him. It's a small quest, but it shows that even rough caravan guards have sentimental sides. Madran's caravan travels between Windhelm and Solitude. He's got a dry sense of humor and seems less bothered by the discrimination than actively amused by the hypocrisy of it all. The Nords complain about the Dominion and the Thalmor, but treat beast folk the same way the Thalmor treat other races. Madran sees the irony even if the Nords don't. Jizargo, at the College of Winterhold, is pursuing magical knowledge with single-minded determination. He wants to be the best mage in the college, possibly the best mage ever. His ambition is refreshing because it's not tempered by the discrimination he must have faced. He knows he's good, and he's not going to let anyone tell him otherwise. His experimental scroll quest is funny in a dark way because the scrolls work too well and hurt the caster. Jizargo admits his calculations were off, but hey, at least he tried something innovative. Mike shows up again in Skyrim, now as a random encounter on the roads. He wears hooded monk robes and carries 3 bottles of skooma. His dialogue is packed with references to changes from Oblivion. He mentions that he always carries 2 weapons in case one breaks, which is funny because weapons don't break in Skyrim like they did in Oblivion. He notes that Mike's father was also called Mike, as was his father's father, at least that's what his father said. This is the first time the games explicitly suggest Mike might be a family name rather than one immortal cat. In ESO, the Khajiit get way more representation and depth. Razandar is a recurring character throughout the Aldmeri Dominion storyline. He's a spy and agent who works for Queen Iron, and he's charming, witty, and skilled. He uses humor to put people at ease before getting information from them. He's involved in uncovering plots against the Queen, dealing with veiled Heritance extremists, and managing various crises. Players love Razumdar because he feels like a fully realized character rather than a walking stereotype. The Elsewhere chapter of ESO, released in 2019, was huge for Khajiit lore. It introduced the legendary hero Kunzari and his companions. The story involves preventing a dragon crisis while exploring ancient Khajiiti history. You get to see different First Dogs interacting. You visit cities like Rimen and smaller settlements throughout northern Elsewhere. The architecture is distinctly Khajiiti, with curved structures, mosaics, and designs that reflect their culture. One questline in the Elsewhere chapter deals with moon sugar production and how the Nahaten flu devastated the industry. Another involves the Order of the New Moon, a group that's trying to achieve something dark using lunar magic. The stories in Elsewhere show Khajiit as complex people with their own heroes, villains, politics, and problems. They're not just side characters in someone else's story, they're the main focus. Let's talk more about the Khajiit relationship with other races, because it varies significantly depending on which race and which time period. The relationship with the Bosmer is especially complicated. Both races live next to each other, and they fought multiple wars throughout history. During the First Era, there were conflicts over territory and resources. The Khajiit expansion into what's now Western Elsewhere often brought them into conflict with Bosmer settlements. There's the 5-year war that happened during the late Third Era. The war started over a dispute about the border between Elsewhere and Valenwood. Both sides accused the other of incursions and attacks. The war dragged on for 5 years before eventually ending in a stalemate with no real winner. Relations remained tense afterward, but during the Second Era, as shown in ESO, the Khajiit and Bosmer are part of the same Aldmeri Dominion alliance along with the Altmer. They work together against the Daggerfall Covenant and Ebonheart Pact. This shows that despite historical conflicts, the two races can cooperate when they have common interests. Some Bosmer respect the Khajiit's connection to Azura since they have their own connection to Yffre. Others still look down on them as beast folk. The Khajiit relationship with the Dunmer is one of the ugliest in Elder Scrolls history. The Dunmer enslaved Khajiit for thousands of years. Great House Dress, in particular, built its entire economy on slave raids into Elsewhere and Black Marsh. The Dunmer saw Khajiit as property, as animals, less than people. Even after slavery was outlawed, many Dunmer continued to look down on beast folk with contempt. In Morrowind, you can hear Dunmer NPCs make racist comments about Khajiit. Some will refuse to deal with you if you're playing as a Khajiit. The cultural prejudice runs deep. Even Dunmer, who oppose slavery, might still view Khajiit as inferior. This makes the few Dunmer who genuinely respect beast folk stand out, like some members of House Hlalu who supported abolition. The Khajiit themselves remember this history. They don't trust the Dunmer, and who can blame them? Generations of Khajiit lived and died in chains because of Dunmer slavers. That kind of trauma doesn't fade quickly. Even Khajiit, born after abolition, carry the cultural memory of what was done to their people. The relationship with the Nords is also problematic, but different in character. The Nords don't practice slavery, at least not openly, but they're deeply suspicious of outsiders. In Skyrim, during the Fourth Era, this suspicion has hardened into active discrimination. The ban on Khajiit entering cities is rationalized as protecting against theft and skooma dealing, but it's clearly based on racial prejudice. The Nords have a warrior culture that values direct confrontation and physical strength. The Khajiit's preference for stealth and cleverness doesn't match Nordic ideals. Nords see Khajiit as sneaky, untrustworthy, probably criminals. The fact that some Khajiit do turn to crime because they're shut out of legitimate opportunities just reinforces the stereotype. What's interesting is that Nord attitudes toward Khajiit seem to have gotten worse over time. In Iso, set in the Second Era, Windhelm has Khajiit, Argonians, and other races living within the city. By the Fourth Era in Skyrim, the Argonians are confined to the docks and Khajiit aren't allowed in at all. Something changed in the intervening centuries, probably related to the general rise of Nordic nationalism and xenophobia that Ulfric Stormcloak represents. The relationship with the Imperials has been pragmatic. The Empire needed soldiers and administrators, and some Khajiit provided both. Imperial policy has generally been more inclusive than Nordic policy, though that's a low bar. The Empire banned moon sugar, which the Khajiit resented, but it didn't try to ban the Khajiit themselves. During the height of the Septim Empire, Khajiit could move relatively freely through imperial provinces and hold positions of some authority. That said, imperial scholars often dismiss Khajiiti culture and religion as primitive superstition. The idea that moon phases determine physical form sounds absurd to someone who doesn't understand the lunar lattice. Imperial texts about Elsewhere often have a condescending tone, describing the Khajiit as if they're interesting curiosities rather than people with a rich and ancient culture. The relationship with the Altmer and Talmor is currently defined by the Void Knights. The Talmor position themselves as saviors, and many Khajiit genuinely believe this. But some Khajiit are starting to see the strings attached. The Thalmor aren't interested in Khajiiti independence or prosperity. They're interested in Khajiiti resources and soldiers. They use Elsewhere to support their own goals. There's a generational divide in how Khajiit view the Thalmor. Older Khajiit who lived through the Void Nights remember the terror and the relief when the moons returned. They're more likely to support the Thalmor out of genuine gratitude. Younger Khajiit who don't have that personal memory are more likely to question whether the Thalmor really deserve their loyalty. As time passes and the Void Knights become history rather than lived experience, Thalmor control over Elsewhere may weaken. The relationship with the Argonians is interesting because both races are beast folk who've been enslaved and discriminated against. You'd think this would create solidarity, and sometimes it does. But there's also competition and friction. Both races are often pushed into the same marginal positions in society, competing for the same scraps. In Windhelm, the Argonians are allowed to work at the docks, which is more than the Khajiit get, and this creates resentment on both sides. That said, Khajiit and Argonian abolitionists worked together in the Twin Lamps movement in Morrowind. They understood that they were fighting the same battle against the same oppressors. When beastfolk band together, they can be a powerful force for change. Their relationship with the Red Guards is less defined in the lore. The Red Guards of Hammerfell neighbor Elsewhere, and there's been trade between the regions for centuries. The Red Guards tend to judge people by their actions rather than their race, which makes them more accepting of Khajiit than Nords. That said, Red Guard ports probably still have issues with skooma smuggling, and the stereotypes about Khajiit thieves exist in Hammerfell too. The relationship with the Bretons is similarly practical. The Bretons are merchants and traders, and the Khajiit are merchants and traders. Business is business. Breton cities might have Khajiit populations, and Khajiit merchants might do well in High Rock, because the Bretons care more about profit than purity. That doesn't mean there's no discrimination, but it's probably less severe than in Skyrim. The relationship with the Orcs is barely mentioned in the lore, probably because both races are marginalized. The Orcs have their strongholds and the Khajiit have their caravans, and they probably don't interact much. If anything, they might have some mutual respect as outsiders who've learned to survive in a world that doesn't want them. Let's dig deeper into some of the mysteries and unanswered questions about the Khajiit. One big question is how reproduction actually works across different firstocks. If two Cathay mate, they could have a child of any firstock depending on the moons. But physically, how does that work? A Sencharat is the size of a giant tiger. An Alfic is the size of a house cat. If a female Sencharat is pregnant, does the size of the developing fetus match the eventual fur stock, or does all Khajiit start small and grow into their forms after birth? The lore suggests all Khajiit cubs start looking similar, probably like small cats, and differentiate as they grow. This would solve the pregnancy problem. A Sencharat mother could carry an Alfiq-sized kitten to term, and then that kitten would either stay small if it's destined to be an Alfiq, or grow massive if it's destined to be a Sencharat. But the exact biological mechanism isn't explained anywhere in the games. Another question is how fur stocks affect lifespan. Do all Khajiit live about the same length, regardless of size, or do the big ones live longer, like large animals tend to? Do the tiny Alfiq have shorter lives, like small animals? The games say Khajiit have lifespans similar to humans, but is that true across all fur stocks? It would make sense if a Sencharat lived longer than a Sutairat, just based on their size difference. What about strength and intelligence? Are all fur stocks equally intelligent, or do the brain sizes matter? The lore insists all Khajiit are sapient and intelligent regardless of form, which suggests brain size doesn't directly correlate to intelligence in the same way it would for real animals. The Alfiq are explicitly said to be magically gifted despite their small size. This implies Khajiit intelligence is tied to their connection to the lunar lattice rather than purely physical brain structure. There's also the question of what determines which Khajiit can reproduce with which. Can an Alfiq and a Sencharat physically mate? The size difference seems prohibitive. Do Khajiit tend to mate within similar-sized fur stocks, or is cross-fur stock mating common? The fact that any two Khajiit can produce any fur stock suggests reproduction isn't limited by the parents' forms, but the practical logistics are unclear. Let's talk about Khajiiti literature and art, because it exists but isn't featured much in the games. The Words of Clan Mother Anisi is one of the few Khajiiti religious texts we have access to. It's written as a mother teaching her daughter about creation and the nature of the world. The style is poetic and uses metaphors drawn from Khajiiti life. It's not a dry theological treatise, it's a story passed down through generations. Khajiit are known for their music, though we rarely hear it in the games. Ta'agra as a language probably has different rhythms and patterns than Tamrielic, and Khajiiti music likely reflects this. The reference to the Toje as dancers in the dark suggests that dance is an important part of their culture too. The claw dances are both martial art and performance art, blending combat technique with aesthetic movement. Khajiiti architecture, as seen in Essos elsewhere, uses lots of curves and flowing lines. The buildings reflect the natural forms of their desert and jungle environments. They use bright colors and intricate mosaics. The style is distinct from the rigid geometric forms preferred by Nords or the organic flowing shapes of Bosmer tree dwellings. Khajiiti architecture looks comfortable and inviting, designed for communal living rather than individual fortification. Khajiit probably have a rich oral tradition of stories and legends. The tale of Kunzari is one example. There are probably hundreds of other heroes, tricksters, and legendary figures whose stories are told around campfires and in clan gatherings. These stories teach moral lessons, preserve history, and reinforce cultural values. The clan mothers are responsible for maintaining and transmitting these stories. The calendar system used by Khajiit is likely tied to lunar cycles rather than solar years. They probably mark time by the phases of the moons and important celestial events. This would make their calendar fundamentally different from the imperial calendar that most of Tamriel uses. Important religious festivals and ceremonies probably coincide with specific moon phases. Let's explore some fan theories that have gained traction in the community. One popular theory is that the Khajiit might be connected to the Dwemer disappearance. The Dwemer vanished in the First Era when they were messing with the heart of Lorkhan. Lorkaj is the Khajiiti version of Lorkhan, and the Khajiit have a deep connection to him through the lunar lattice. Some fans speculate that whatever the Dwemer did might have affected the lunar lattice in ways we don't understand. This is pretty speculative, but it's interesting to think about. Another theory suggests that the different first stalks might represent different potential evolutionary paths. Maybe the Alphic represent what would happen if Khajiit stayed fully feline, while the Ohms represent what would happen if they became fully humanoid. The moon phases don't just form randomly, they guide development along different evolutionary branches that all exist simultaneously. This would mean the Khajiit aren't just one species, but a superposition of multiple potential species. There's a darker theory that the Void Knights were a test run for something bigger. If the Thalmor could make the moons disappear for 2 years, what else can they do? Some fans think the Thalmor's ultimate goal involves unmaking Mundus itself, returning to the immortal state that the Aedra lost when they created the mortal world. Making the moons disappear might have been a step toward that goal, a way to test their ability to unmake parts of creation. Connected to this is the theory that the lunar lattice is one of the towers, the mythical structures that hold reality together. The White Gold Tower, Red Tower, Crystal Tower, and others are all supposedly maintaining the fabric of Mundus. If the lunar lattice is a tower, then disrupting it by removing the moons would weaken reality itself. The Thalmor might have been testing whether they could destroy a tower without causing an immediate collapse of everything. Some fans theorize that Mike the Liar might be an aspect of Shogorath or another Daedric prince. His impossible longevity, his fourth wall breaking dialogue, and his apparent knowledge of things he shouldn't know all suggest he's more than a simple mortal. Alternatively, he might be a prisoner, the same kind of entity that player characters are supposed to be. The prisoner exists outside normal causality and can observe multiple timelines. This would explain how Mike knows about game features that don't exist and can comment on changes between games. There's speculation about what would happen if a Khajiit achieved Kim, the state of enlightenment where you realize you're part of a dream but maintain your existence anyway. Would their form become mutable, able to shift between first stalks at will? Would they transcend the lunar lattice entirely? Or would their connection to the moons become even stronger, making them a living embodiment of the lattice itself? Another theory involves the nature of the Mane. If the Mane really is one soul reincarnating, whose soul is it? The obvious answer would be Lorkaj or Alkosh, but what if it's actually Azura herself? She created the Khajiit and gave them the lunar lattice. Maybe she maintains a presence among them through the Mane, directly guiding her chosen people. This would explain why the Mane has such absolute authority and why even skeptical Khajiit respect the position. Some fans wonder if there might be Khajiit on other planes of existence. Are there Khajiit in Oblivion serving the Daedric princes? Are there Khajiit in Aetherius with the Aedra? If Khajiit souls travel along the lunar lattice to reach the afterlife, maybe some souls get lost along the way and end up in unexpected places. There could be Khajiit communities in Daedric realms that have adapted to their strange environments. There's a theory that the Sencha tigers and other non-sapient feline creatures might actually be Khajiit who've lost their connection to the lunar lattice somehow. Maybe they're descendants of Khajiit who were cursed, or who lived far from the moon's influence for too long. This would explain why they look so similar to the Sencha and Pahmar first stalks, while lacking intelligence. It's a grim idea, but it fits the often dark tone of Elder Scrolls lore. Let's talk about how modders and the community have expanded on Khajiit lore. The Elsewhere. The Deserts of Anaquina mod for Oblivion added a huge playable area representing northern Elsewhere. It included new cities, quest lines, and characters that explored Khajiiti culture in depth. The mod tried to fill in the gaps left by the official games and gave players a chance to actually visit the Khajiit homeland before ESO did. The Moonpath to Elsewhere mod for Skyrim added a quest that took players to a small part of southern Elsewhere. It showed the lush jungles, ancient ruins, and unique challenges of the region. The mod gave players a taste of what Elsewhere could be like and built anticipation for official content. Countless role-playing mods have added Khajiit-specific content, from race height adjusters that let you play as different first stocks to dialogue overhauls that give Khajiit NPCs more personality. The community has consistently wanted more Khajiit content, more depth, more representation of the lore that exists in books and wikis but isn't always visible in the games themselves. The dedication of the Khajiit fandom shows how compelling these characters are. People have written extensive role-playing guides for Khajiiti characters, detailing how different first stocks would approach different situations, what gods they'd worship, how they'd react to racism, what their motivations would be. The community has fleshed out aspects of Khajiiti life that Bethesda never explicitly defined. Fan art of Khajiit has ranged from cute and cuddly to fierce and intimidating to alluring and elegant. Artists have depicted different first stocks, explored Khajiiti fashion and culture, and created original characters with their own stories. The visual diversity of Khajiit makes them fun to draw and design. Let's consider how future Elder Scrolls games might expand on Khajiit lore. If Elder Scrolls 6 is set in Hammerfell, as many people suspect, we'd likely see Khajiit characters and possibly caravans crossing the Alik'r Desert. The relationship between Hammerfell and elsewhere during the Fourth Era could be explored. Are the Redguards sympathetic to the Khajiit situation under the Dominion, or are they more concerned with their own independence? If a future game or DLC took us to Elsewhere again, there's so much more to explore. We've only seen Northern Elsewhere in detail through ESO. Southern Palatine, with its jungles and ancient cities, is mostly unexplored. The relationship between the two kingdoms could be a major story element. The lingering effects of the Void Knights on Khajiiti society could be examined. The presence of different first stocks and how they interact could be shown in more detail. A game set during the Void Knights themselves would be fascinating, but probably too dark for a main Elder Scrolls title. Imagine playing during those 2 years when the moons were gone, seeing the panic and desperation, watching society crumble, and then being there when the Talmor restored the moons. It would be an emotional roller coaster that really drives home what that event meant to the Khajiit. The inevitable question is whether future games will actually show more first stock diversity or continue to standardize on one form. ESO showed it's possible to have multiple first stocks existing simultaneously. The different skeleton rigs and animations required are significant work, but not impossible. Players would love the option to choose their first stock during character creation, even if it's limited to the bipedal forms for practical reasons. There's potential for a game where you play specifically as a Khajiit protagonist, similar to Redguard focusing on a Redguard character. A game about Khajiiti independence, rebellion against the Thalmor, or the unification of the 16 kingdoms would give players deep insight into Khajiiti culture while telling a compelling story. The gameplay could incorporate unique Khajiiti abilities like the claw dances or navigation by the moons. Let's dive even deeper into Khajiiti naming conventions because they're more complex than they first appear. The prefixes aren't arbitrary. They mean specific things about the person's role, accomplishments, or family status. The prefix J, as seen in names like Jay, Zargo, Jadar, and Jarasha, typically indicates a young male, often someone who's still proving themselves. It's the most common prefix you'll see in the games because many Khajiit characters are young adults out seeking their fortune. The prefix M is used by adults and carries implications of experience or maturity. Mike, the liar, has this prefix, as does Madran, one of the caravan leaders in Skyrim. The prefix can indicate someone who's established themselves in life, even if that establishment is as a wandering liar or merchant. S and Dro are other common male prefixes. Skriva, the fence in Oblivion, has a name that would typically be male, but she's female, which shows the naming conventions aren't absolute. Maybe she chose a male prefix for business reasons, or maybe female naming rules are more flexible than we think. Drozel and Drozira are other characters with the Dro prefix, which might indicate a specific clan or family tradition. The prefix ra appears less frequently but seems to indicate someone of importance or skill. The suffix ra appears in many names like Razumdar and Jaydar. Some sources suggest Dar relates to thievery or cleverness. Razumdar is a spy, so that fits. The suffix Rasha might mean apprentice or student. The suffix ri can indicate someone from a particular region or someone who's achieved a particular status. Female Khajiit names follow different patterns. Akhkari, Khaila, Savani, and Yusolda all lack the prefix structure of male names. They tend to be more flowing and often end in vowels. Some female names like Dagiracht or clan mother Ahnisi use different structures entirely, possibly reflecting their specific roles or first stocks. The language Tagra itself has only been partially documented. We know some vocabulary from in-game books and dialogue. Jakaje means the lunar lattice. Jamath is moon sugar. Mutsera is a term of respect, borrowed from Dunmeris. The language has its own grammar that doesn't perfectly map onto Tamrielic, which is why Khajiit-speaking Tamrielic sometimes have unusual speech patterns. When Khajiit speak Tagra, as we hear briefly in some games, it sounds lyrical with lots of soft consonants and rolling roos. The language probably has different words for different first stocks rather than lumping them all under Khajiit. It probably has specific vocabulary related to the moons, moon phases, and the lunar lattice that don't translate well into Tamrielic. Religious concepts that take paragraphs to explain in Tamrielic might be single words in Tagra. Khageeti trade practices are another interesting area. The caravans we see in Skyrim are just one aspect of a much larger mercantile tradition. Khajiit have been traders for millennia. The southern merchant houses of Palatine have ancient ties to trade routes across the sea to Topol Bay and around the coast to Valenwood and Somerset. Northern Khajiit caravans have crossed the desert to reach Cyrodiil and Hammerfell for centuries. Khajiit merchants have a reputation for being shrewd negotiators. They know the value of what they're selling and they won't be cheated easily. At the same time, they're often willing to trade in goods that other merchants won't touch. Moon sugar, skooma, stolen merchandise, dangerous magical artifacts. If there's a market for it, a Khajiit merchant can probably get it for you. This flexibility makes them valuable, but also reinforces the stereotype that they're shady. The caravan system itself is fascinating. A typical caravan consists of a merchant leader, several guards, pack animals, and traveling merchants who sell different goods. Everyone in the caravan has a role. The leader handles major negotiations and determines the route. The guards protect against bandits and wild animals. The individual merchants each have their specialties. One might focus on weapons and armor, another on potions and ingredients, another on jewelry and curiosities. Caravans follow seasonal routes, going where demand is highest and avoiding dangerous areas during certain times of year. They maintain relationships with local merchants and inns, establishing regular stopping points. Some caravans have been following the same routes for generations, with children learning the trade from their parents and grandparents. The exclusion of Khajiit from cities in Skyrim severely disrupts this traditional trade model. Instead of being able to set up in marketplaces and interact with a wide range of customers, they're forced to camp outside and wait for people to come to them. This reduces their customer base and makes them more vulnerable to thieves and hostile wildlife. The fact that they persist despite these obstacles shows their determination and business acumen. Let's talk about specific historical events that shaped the Khajiit beyond what we've already covered. The Nahaten flu in the Second Era, which we mentioned briefly, was devastating. This plague originated in Black Marsh and was deliberately spread by the Argonians to drive out other races from their homeland. It swept through elsewhere, killing massive numbers of Khajiit. The death toll was horrific. Entire cities were depopulated. The moon sugar industry nearly collapsed because so many workers died. The recovery from the Nahaten flu took decades. It changed elsewhere's economy and demographics. Some regions never fully recovered. The scars from that plague influenced Khajiiti attitudes toward disease and outsiders for generations afterward. It's one reason why Khajiit can be cautious about travelers from distant lands. The memory of plague brought from outside still lingers. During the Oblivion Crisis in the late Third Era, Elsewhere faced multiple Oblivion gates opening throughout the province. The Khajiit fought desperately to close these gates and protect their homeland. Different Firstocks each contributed in their own ways. The Sencharat and Kathairat served as shock troops. The Suthairat and Kathai handled more mobile tactical roles. The Alfiq used magic to support the war effort. The crisis brought the Khajiit together and demonstrated their effectiveness as warriors when defending their home. When the Oblivion Crisis ended and the Septim dynasty fell, Elsewhere entered a period of instability. The Mede dynasty that followed couldn't command the same loyalty as the Septims. This instability set the stage for the Void Knights and the Thalmor takeover. If the empire had been stronger in Elsewhere, if the Khajiit had felt more connected to imperial rule, maybe the Thalmor wouldn't have been able to exploit the Void Knights so effectively. Let's discuss Khajiiti military traditions beyond just the claw dances. The northern tribes of Anequina have a warrior culture that produces fierce fighters. They're used to harsh conditions and constant conflict over resources. Their military tactics emphasize mobility and endurance. They can march through the desert for days, strike hard, and disappear before enemies can mount an effective response. The Southern Palatine military tradition is more formal and organized. They have standing armies, trained officers, and established military doctrine. Their tactics emphasize coordination and the effective use of different Firstocks in combined arms operations. A Palatine military force might have Kathairat infantry holding the line, Suthairat archers providing range support, Sench cavalry for shock charges, and Alfiq mages casting battlefield control spells. The integration of different Firstocks into military units requires careful planning. The massive Pamarat and Sencharat need different equipment, accommodations, and logistical support than the smaller bipedal forms. But when used effectively, this diversity is a strength. An army that includes housecat-sized mages, bipedal warriors, and tiger-sized battle mounts has tactical options that a homogeneous force lacks. Khajiiti naval traditions are less developed than other maritime races. Khajiit generally prefer land travel to sea travel. The old saying goes that a Khajiit's true home is the desert sand, not the ocean waves. That said, necessity has forced some Khajiit to become skilled sailors. The moon sugar trade requires shipping, and some Khajiit have taken to piracy when other options weren't available. These seafaring Khajiit are exceptions rather than the rule, but they demonstrate the race's adaptability. Let's explore the relationship between Khajiit and magic more deeply. While Khajiit aren't traditionally known as mages, certain Firstocks excel at magic. The Alfiq are naturally gifted with arcane abilities. The Dagi and Dagirat are skilled with spellcasting. The Tojai are said to wield strange magics tied to the moons. These magically adept Firstocks contribute significantly to Khajiiti society, even if they're not always visible in the games. Khajiiti magic might be different from the magic practiced by humans and elves. Their connection to the lunar lattice could allow them to tap into lunar energies in ways others can't. The fact that their physical forms are determined by moon phases suggests they have an inherent magical nature. Some scholars theorize that all Khajiit have latent magical abilities tied to the lattice, but only certain Firstocks can actively channel that magic into spells. The concept of the lunar lattice itself is magical in nature. It's described as protecting Mundus from the Arbis, which suggests it's a kind of cosmic ward or barrier. If the Khajiit maintain or strengthen the lattice through their existence and their worship of the moons, then every Khajiit is participating in a massive enchantment whether they realize it or not. This would make the entire race collectively responsible for maintaining a crucial magical structure. Khajiiti alchemy is particularly advanced when it comes to moon sugar and its derivatives. They know how to process moon sugar in ways that other races don't understand. The various forms of skooma with different potencies and effects suggest a sophisticated understanding of alchemical processes. The fact that skooma affects Khajiit less severely than other races indicates their physiology is specifically adapted to moon sugar, which makes sense if they've been consuming it as part of their diet for thousands of years. Let's talk about Khajiiti attitudes toward death and the afterlife in more detail. The concept of the sands behind the stars is beautiful and poetic. It's a place where worthy Khajiit go to rest after their struggles in the mortal world. The journey there follows the lunar lattice, which means dying Khajiit might actually perceive a path of moonlight leading them to the afterlife. The Order of the Hidden Moon helps guide these souls, protecting them from threats in the void between worlds. What makes a Khajiit worthy of the sands behind the stars? Presumably following the virtues of the Riddle Thar: curiosity, cleverness, kindness, piety, and wariness. But there's probably more to it. Living with honor, contributing to your clan, respecting the moons, and maintaining your connection to your culture likely all factor in. Khajiit, who lose their way, who become consumed by skooma addiction, or who commit terrible crimes, might not reach the sands. What happens to unworthy Khajiit souls? This isn't explicitly stated, but given Khajiiti religious beliefs, they might be claimed by malevolent spirits or lost in the void. The dark moon of Lorkaj prowls the lattice, but he protects worthy souls. Unworthy souls might face different treatment. Or perhaps Namira, the Great Darkness, claims those who succumb to her temptations. Khajiiti funeral practices probably vary between regions and clans. Northern tribes might practice sky burial, leaving bodies in the desert for scavengers, believing this returns the physical form to nature while freeing the soul. Southern Palatine might have more elaborate burial ceremonies with tombs and monuments. The common thread is likely the belief that the body is temporary, but the soul's journey along the lunar lattice is eternal. Let's examine specific Khajiit characters we haven't fully explored. In Esso, there's Abnur Tharn. Okay, he's not a Khajiit, but his complex relationship with Khajiit characters in the story is interesting. Actually, let's focus on actual Khajiit. In Skyrim, there's Mazaka, who tends the lighthouse in Solitude. She's one of the few Khajiit who has permanent residence in a major city, which makes her unusual. Her dialogue suggests she's been there for years, managing the lighthouse and guiding ships safely to port. This is quiet, essential work that doesn't fit the thief stereotype at all. In Morrowind, there's Khajiit mage Sharn Gramuzgop. Wait, that's an orc. Let me think of actual Khajiit in Morrowind. There's Razar in Tel Branora, who's enslaved by a Telvanni wizard. Freeing Razar as part of the Twin Lamps questline shows the cruelty of the slave system. Razar hasn't done anything wrong, he's just property to his master. When you free him, he's grateful but also uncertain about what comes next. Freedom is terrifying when you've been enslaved your whole life. In Oblivion Beyond Escriva, there's the wandering merchant Khajiit you encounter on the roads. While they're generic NPCs, their existence shows that Khajiit merchants are common throughout Cyrodiil during the Third Era. They're integrated into the economy even if they're not fully integrated into society. The broader point is that for every memorable named Khajiit, there are countless unnamed ones living their lives throughout Tamriel. The caravan guards who protect merchants from bandits. The dock workers in ports loading and unloading ships. The thieves in city sewers trying to survive. The soldiers in the Dominion army far from home. Each of these unnamed Khajiit has their own story, their own reasons for being where they are, their own hopes and fears. This is what makes the Khajiit such a rich race to explore. They're not monolithic. A wealthy merchant from Palatine has almost nothing in common with a desperate skooma addict in Riften slums, except they're both Khajiit and they both face the same prejudices. The diversity of experience within the race mirrors the diversity of their physical forms. Let's consider how climate and environment shape Khajiit culture in different regions. The desert Khajiit of northern Anekina are tough and resilient. They know how to find water in seemingly barren landscapes. They know which plants are edible and which are poisonous. They can navigate by the stars and moons, even when sandstorms obscure the land. Their clothing is practical, designed to protect from sun and sand. The jungle Khajiit of southern Palatine deal with entirely different challenges. They contend with humidity, dangerous predators, poisonous insects, and diseases that thrive in the tropics. Their architecture uses stilts to raise buildings off the wet ground. They know which jungle plants have medicinal properties. They're skilled at moving through dense undergrowth. Their clothing is lighter and designed for ventilation. The differences between North and South contributed to the historical divide between Anaquina and Palatine. They weren't just political entities, they represented fundamentally different ways of life adapted to different environments. The fact that they eventually united and stayed unified, despite the Void Knight's disruption, shows that Khajiit identity transcends these regional differences. And that's everything, truly everything, there is to know about the Khajiit in the Elder Scrolls games. From their bizarre moon-dependent biology to their complex history with the Empire and Talmor, from their sacred moon sugar to their various fur stocks, from their discrimination and slavery to their survival and adaptation, from their appearance in every game to their deep cultural traditions, from the mysteries surrounding them to the theories fans have developed, from their relationships with other races to their unique place in Tamriel's history, the Khajiit are one of the most interesting and well-developed races in gaming. They've been there since Arena, and they'll probably be around for whatever comes next in the series. Because if there's one thing the Khajiit know how to do, it's endure. May your road lead to warm sands.